This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers and scholars, or simply people of ideas of all types and vocations who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. My guest today is a professor of Jewish studies at Tulane University in New Orleans. He is the co-editor of the recently published Story of My Life, the first out of 3 autobiographies written by Vladimir Zeev Jabotinsky, the founding father of the Revisionist movement in Zionism, the precursor of today's Likud party, and pretty much the entire Israeli right. Originally published in Hebrew in 1936, this is the first published English translation of the book. Professor Brian Horowitz, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Greetings.
So Jabotinsky was born in Odessa in 1880, round about the same time and place as Zionism. How did the young Vladimir become interested in Zionism in the first place?
Well, his life took a different path than the usual Zionist trajectory. Like, look at Ahad Ha'am or Ravnitsky, Bialik. These are ex-Yeshiva Bocher stories, and Jabotinsky was very different. He did not know Hebrew from birth, did not know Yiddish. He was a Russified Jew from this port on the Black Sea, and he knew his Pushkin. He went to the Richelieu Lyceum, quitting just before graduating and going to Italy and serving as a journalist for the Odessa newspaper, first Odesky Listok, and then Odesky Novosti. Mm-hmm. And so this journalism sort of brought him into politics, culture, theater, and through these intellectual interests came the realization that there was no other way, but if you're a Jew, you have to be true to yourself.
What was the tipping point? When did it dawn on him? You said he didn't imbibe it, so he kind of grew into it. When and against what backdrop did this realization come?
So all the scholars think it's Kishinev, 1903, the pogrom. Right before that, there was rumors in the city of Odessa that there was going to be a pogrom, and Jabotinsky became very excited to start his own self-defense unit, only to find that there was one already existing. Mm-hmm. And then he became a very important person in this little group of people. He acquired guns for them. He was up all hours and working. But so scholars think this is the main point. For me, I think it took him more than just 1903. It took him still a couple of years, and even past 1907, 08, 09, until he becomes a mature thinker in Zionism.
Mm-hmm. And so what was it later in his life after Kishinev? Can you pinpoint a certain moment or a certain event, or I'm trying to figure out how his political worldview evolved really out of thin air.
Yeah, so this is my Monty Python, my theory idea, which is that it happened more gradually. So in 1905, which is for everyone the biggest moment in Russia, the 1905 revolution, Jabotinsky becomes very interested in organic Zionism and especially in the relationship of liberals and Zionists to join together. And what he sees in 1905 in October is the first real large pogroms, and then Bialystok pogrom in 1906, and this all turns him off to this collaborative effort, this ability to unite with the Russian intelligentsia, and then he really it brings him closer in a way to the two dimensions of his thought, which is Herzlian revisionism, which is political negotiations in the world with world powers like the English Empire, and on the other hand, boots on the ground, infiltration, immigration, and creating a political atmosphere in Palestine for a larger Jewish commonwealth.
Mm-hmm. In many ways, in his thought, he was swimming against the current. I mean, he was as I said, the founder of the right wing in Zionism, that is more nationalist, more militaristic. He was reviled by his opponents as proto-fascist and fascist later. Also, he was anti-socialist, which was pretty rare for a Russian Zionist at the time. How did he become such a maverick in this sense?
I think that he might have been a socialist if he had been born 10 years earlier. That is, he has a little anecdote in Sipor Yamai, Story of My Life, where he set the first Zionist Congress that he went to in 1903, and he goes up to Weizmann and he says, can I join you guys? You're speaking Russian, and they say no. And this is, for him, an important moment that he can't be the leader of that party. He can't be the leader of the labor Zionists. He can't be the leader of the general Zionists. He has to find his own way.
Why did they say no?
He was just an unknown figure. He just
so he resented Weizmann till his dying day because he said no in 1903?
Not exactly like that, but he resented that he couldn't rise to the position that Weizmann had earlier than he did. And when there was an opportunity to become a leader of the party, of the Zionist movement, it took him much longer, and the only space, the vacuum that was available, was on the right. It made sense that after his Legion experience, that is, he helped with Trumpeldor to create the Jewish Legion, that
in the First World
War, that there was clearly the concept of militarism and force as a useful tool for politics. Less for militarism itself, but for politics, that is, to help the British war effort in the hopes of, after the war, gaining a place at the peace table and some influence over the future of Palestine.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that Jabotinsky was a right-winger by default? You don't think it was more principled than that?
I think he's very flexible, and in a way, what you're saying is true, but it's also that he by default, because in some of his ideas, he never gave up socialist ideas. Like a guaranteed base income was one of his ideas. That's very socialist, right? And he did not believe in the class conflict, but still understood that workers had to have rights and to have those rights protected. He just thought instead of strikes, you should use a system of compromise between the labor and management that would allow for the growth of the yeshuv.
Mm-hmm. At what point did he become a Zionist ideologue and leader to be reckoned with?
I think that happened in response to the appearance of more radicals in the party in 1928 to 30. This is Abba Meir, Yehoshua Yevin,
radicals on the right,
Tzvi Greenberg, yeah, and they pushed him to. They saw him as their leader. They had a more, if you will, radical right vision of a party with the leadership principle, a la Mussolini in Italy, and he wanted to be liked by them. He needed to expand his party. He needed also to be part of that movement, and so he pushed himself to the right. At that time.
So do you think that the accusations that were voiced by his opponents on the left of him being an authoritarian and proto-fascist leader were founded?
Well, he didn't think so, and I think he's a very contradictory figure. He defended democratic principles, always elections. On the other hand, when there was a coup d'état within his own revisionist party in 1933, he took power and then later held a referendum on his own coup d'état over his executive committee from London. So in a way, he didn't realize the democratic and principles that he believed in himself and the liberal ideas of individualism and protection of civil rights and equality for all nationalities, including national rights for Arabs. So these are all principles that he believed in, that he articulated, but that he didn't realize fully. So, so he was open. I mean, he made himself vulnerable to these accusations. Clearly, he didn't get in the way, of the establishment of, let's say, the Irgun. He supported that. He had many difficulties in 1936, the time of the Arab uprising, that he
in Palestine.
Yeah, in Palestine, that he did not approve of terrorism against civilians by Jewish extremists. On the other hand, he also did not accept the British response to those actions, such as hanging of Irgun members.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You said that in 1903 he turned his back on the Zionist establishment because he was really looking to succeed Weizmann and realized that he couldn't. He was 23 then. Do you think that he espoused leadership aspirations from the minute he became a Zionist?
Oh, I definitely do. One of the things is that in this Yevreiskaya Zhizn, which was the first Zionist paper that opened in St. Petersburg in 1904, which he left Odessa to be a part of, already at the very beginning, he gets into fights with the editor there, Avram Edelson, his mentor. He sort of seemed to fight with everyone who was his equal, and he was much better off with followers, actually.
As many of us are. About that specific book itself, we said it's the first time that it's being published in English, even though it was originally published 80 years ago. The thing about autobiographies in general, and this specific one, is that you never know how reliable it is, really, because the veracity of some of the events recounted in this book have been contested. To you, as a historian, as a researcher, how valuable do you find that source?
I think it's very useful because, in a sense, what we're trying to reconstruct is not necessarily what actually happened day by day. It's the way Jabotinsky portrayed himself through his life, in his trajectory, how he became the Vladimir Zeev Jabotinsky rather than just Vladimir Jabotinsky, average man. So it's really, really very, very critical to read this book and to take it apart and try to make sense of what is fact, what is fiction. But in the end, what happens is that the two get mixed up, and you realize that Jabotinsky made a specific effort to create an autobiography that would have influence, that would inspire, like the Beitarist. So it's kind of an everyman story. It's a story, about someone who maybe shouldn't have become a Zionist, but then devote himself fully to Zionism, says Hebrew is should be our national language, and we have to devote ourselves entirely to creating the state, monism.
So in many ways, it was a manifesto as well. Jabotinsky was a novelist and a poet and a man of letters. So all these aspects of his personality basically found their way into his memoirs. Definitely.
That is the fascinating thing, that it's such a multi-genre piece. It's political autobiography, but it's also a manifesto and how to become a Zionist and how to become a Beitarist. And there's so many details that are in there. One specific thing I think is that he creates in this book mentor figures like Trumpeldor for himself, and Herzl for himself, people who he looks to for purpose, for whose example, in their life example, inspires him and teaches him how to behave. So, Nordau, for instance.
Do you have any idea why it hasn't been translated into English before?
The funny thing is that my colleague Leonid Katzis from Moscow was working in the archive and just happened to find this unfinished raw translation. So anyone could have found it years ago and published it. It's just that nobody was looking for it and nobody found it.
Mm-hmm. So really, what are the insights that this book offers into the study of Jabotinsky as the great personality that he was? What really is the added value of this primary source as opposed to the many, many secondary sources that are out there?
I think that he takes his life from 1884, from as young as 4 years old, and follows it all the way up to 1915. And each story is kind of a parable about how to become a Zionist and how to behave. So there's, he talked to his mother. He has no particular Jewish background, doesn't go to Hebrew school or anything. And then he says, well, will we have a Jewish state someday? And she says, of course, that's beyond doubt. And so he gets this belief from his mother's milk, and how apocryphal can that be? So it seems like there's a certain fate in his own life, that every step maybe was going in a different direction, but actually was part of a larger wove pattern that led him to the right way politically, and his enemies to the wrong way. Right?
Mm-hmm. All right. Professor Brian Horowitz, Department of Jewish Studies at Tulane University in New Orleans, and the co-editor of the recently published Story of My Life, the first out of 3 autobiographies written by Vladimir Zeev Jabotinsky. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Well, thank you for having me.
That brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you very much for listening. Also, big thanks to Alex Benish, the technical producer of this show. I'm Gilad Halpern, signing off here in Tel Aviv. Do join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.
I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things that I should like to say. Say them loud, say them clear, for the whole round world to hear.